Tenerife Airport Disaster. It was March 27, 1977, and two Boeing 747 jumbo jets were about to take off at Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife, Spain. The first plane, KLM Flight 4E805, was piloted by an experienced captain, while Pan Am Flight 1736 was being taxied by a seasoned crew. Both planes had been diverted to Tenerife due to a terrorist bombing at Gran Canaria Airport, their original destination. The small regional airport was packed with diverted flights, forcing many planes to park on the taxiway and creating an unusually chaotic environment. The crews of both flights were growing restless as delays stretched on, but the KLM crew was especially eager to depart. After hours of waiting, they were finally instructed to taxi to the runway for takeoff. The Pan Am flight was asked to follow behind, but was told to exit the runway at a designated taxiway to allow the KLM jet to take off. However, dense fog had rolled in, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Inside the KLM cockpit, the captain was confident they were cleared for takeoff. His first officer, unsure, hesitated but didn't press the issue. Meanwhile, the Pan Am crew, still on the runway, struggled to locate their exit in the fog. They were unaware that the KLM plane had already begun accelerating down the same runway. The KLM captain, eager to leave, initiated takeoff without confirming the runway was clear. As the KLM jet sped down the runway, the Pan Am crew spotted its landing lights through the fog. They tried desperately to turn off the runway, but the massive jet couldn't move quickly enough. The KLM plane, traveling at full speed, slammed into the Pan Am jet. Both planes erupted into flames, their wreckage scattering across the runway. All 248 people aboard the KLM flight were killed instantly. On the Pan Am flight, 335 passengers perished, but 61 managed to escape through broken sections of the fuselage before the fire consumed the plane. Japan Airlines Flight 123. It was August 12, 1985, and Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747, was preparing for a routine domestic flight from Tokyo to Osaka. On board were 524 passengers and crew, most of whom were traveling home for the Obon holiday. The aircraft had undergone maintenance earlier that year, which involved repairs to its rear pressure bulkhead, which maintains cabin pressure at high altitudes. However, the repair had been improperly conducted, creating a ticking time bomb within the plane. Shortly after takeoff, everything seemed normal. About 12 minutes into the flight, at 24,000 feet, a loud bang was heard through the cabin. The rear pressure bulkhead had ruptured, causing explosive decompression. This sudden loss of pressure blew off the vertical stabilizer and severed hydraulic lines, leaving the aircraft without control over its flight surfaces. The pilots immediately declared an emergency and struggled to stabilize the aircraft. With no hydraulics, the plane became nearly impossible to control. The crew attempted to use engine thrust to maneuver, but this was a near impossible task for such a large aircraft. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, the rapid descent caused panic. Many passengers wrote farewell notes to loved ones. The plane flew erratically for 32 minutes, turning wildly as the crew desperately tried to find a safe landing spot. Tragically, despite the pilots' heroic efforts, the plane crashed into the remote Mount Takamagahara, breaking apart on impact. Out of the 524 people on board, only 4 survived: 2 young girls, a woman, and a flight attendant. The rest died due to the crash or from injuries sustained in the hours before help arrived. Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. It's November 12, 1996, and Saudi Arabian Airlines Flight 763 is preparing for its journey from New Delhi to Dushan. The Boeing 747 carried 312 passengers and crew, mostly workers heading home. At the same time, Kazakhstan Airlines Flight 1907, a smaller Ilyushin Il-76, was descending toward Indira Gandhi International Airport, carrying 37 passengers and crew. The communication between air traffic control and the pilots relied heavily on English, a second language for the Kazakh crew, who struggled to understand instructions. The Saudi flight had just taken off and was climbing to its assigned altitude of 14,000 feet. Meanwhile, the Kazakh flight was instructed to descend to 15,000 feet and hold. As the Kazakh crew descended, they misinterpreted ATC instructions due to language barriers and an over-reliance on their altimeter. Believing they were clear to descend further, they mistakenly dropped below their assigned altitude, entering the same airspace as the Saudi plane. The ATC radar operator noticed the conflict and frantically tried to warn both planes, but it was too late. At 6:40 p.m., the two planes collided mid-air over the village of Charkhi Dadri. The tail of the Kazakh Ilyushin sliced through the left wing of the Saudi Boeing, ripping apart its fuel tanks and causing an explosion. The Kazakh plane's cockpit and forward fuselage were destroyed instantly. On board the Saudi plane, the passengers and crew had no chance of survival. The explosion caused the aircraft to break apart mid-air, killing all 312 people instantly. The Kazakh plane, heavily damaged, spiraled out of control and crashed into the ground, killing all 37 on board. Turkish Airlines Flight 981. It was March 3, 1974, and Turkish Airlines Flight 981, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, was preparing for its flight from Istanbul to London with a stop in Paris. The plane carried 346 passengers and crew, including many British tourists and Turkish workers traveling to the UK. The DC-10 was relatively new at that time and was considered one of the most advanced aircraft. However, it had some hidden flaws in its design. The first leg of the journey from Istanbul to Paris went smoothly. In Paris, a large number of passengers boarded the aircraft, filling it to capacity. The plane took off from Orly Airport at 12:32 p.m. bound for London. The cargo door at the rear of the plane, which had been improperly latched due to a design flaw and human error during loading, suddenly blew off at an altitude of 12,000 feet. This created a massive decompression, causing a section of the cabin floor to collapse. This caused the passengers seated near the rear to be instantly killed or ejected from the aircraft. The cockpit crew, led by Captain Nejat Burkos, fought to stabilize the aircraft, but the loss of control cables left them with limited options. The plane began a steep dive. In just 72 seconds, Flight 981 crashed into the Ermenonville forest, about 40 kilometers northeast of Paris, at nearly 500 miles per hour. The impact was so severe that the plane disintegrated on contact, leaving no survivors. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17, a Boeing 777-200ER, was carrying 298 people. The flight was a routine journey, taking off from Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam at 12:14 p.m. to Kuala Lumpur. The plane was traveling through a busy air corridor over the conflict zone in eastern Ukraine, which had been embroiled in a violent conflict between Ukrainian government forces and pro-Russian separatists. The airspace over eastern Ukraine was still considered safe for commercial flights. At 1:20 p.m., just an hour after takeoff, Flight MH17's communications were lost. The plane disappeared from radar screens at 1:21 p.m., and there were no distress signals or reports of any problems from the flight crew. At that moment, the aircraft was flying at an altitude of 33,000 feet, over an area controlled by pro-Russian separatists. It was soon discovered that the aircraft had been shot down by a surface-to-air missile, specifically a Buk missile system. An investigation later determined that the missile system had been supplied by Russia. The missile exploded just above the plane's left wing, tearing apart the plane's fuselage, causing rapid decompression. Flight MH17's last moments were captured by witnesses on the ground, who reported seeing a large explosion in the sky, followed by the plane's rapid descent. The plane plummeted to the ground, killing everyone on board. Air India Flight 182. On June 23, 1985, Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747-200, was en route from Toronto, Canada, to New Delhi, India. The flight had 329 people aboard. The majority of the passengers were of Indian origin, many of whom were traveling to India to visit family or for business purposes. The aircraft had taken off from Toronto Pearson International Airport at approximately 8:15 a.m. local time. At 8:13 a.m., just 45 minutes after departure, as the plane was cruising at 31,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, a bomb hidden in the cargo hold exploded. The explosion occurred in the forward cargo compartment, where a suitcase containing the bomb had been placed. The bomb was made up of a powerful explosive device, along with a timer to trigger the blast. The force of the blast was so intense that it tore through the forward sections of the plane, including the cockpit and the forward passenger cabin. At the same time, the fire caused by the bomb spread quickly through the aircraft. At 8:23 a.m., just 10 minutes after the explosion, the Boeing 747 broke apart in midair. The wreckage fell into the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 120 miles off the coast of Ireland. All 329 people on board were killed. The bombing was later determined to be a terrorist attack carried out by a Sikh extremist group based in Canada, seeking revenge for the Indian government's actions in the 1984 Operation Blue Star. If you found this video interesting, consider liking it and subscribing to my channel. It helps a lot with the algorithm.